Hello students and welcome to chapter number 9. In this chapter we will be discussing planning reports, a big part of business communication. A big part of communication in professional organizations is writing and composing and interpreting reports. So this is a major skill that you need to develop in order for you to be, marketable for employers. So throughout this chapter, we will discuss the different types of data that you would find in a typical report and how would you present this report in a more effective way to decision makers. So like any communication, like any writing piece, there's a lot of preparation that needs to go into planning your outcome, planning this report. So to write a report, when you are given this task by a manager or a supervisor, that you are in charge of now writing a report, there are a lot of steps that you need to follow. One of them is finding sources. So your topic is about, for example, sales projections for for the coming 2 years. So how will you find the sources of information? Which departments are you going to ask? Which sources online do you have to utilize? Then you will have to collect different types of data. So you have to compile these data and for you to be able to analyze it. And then you will have to find a good way of displaying or showing or communicating, presenting this quantitative information. So there's a difference between quantitative from quantity and qualitative from quality information. So how are you going to show these figures, these data, these graphs and such? And then the interpretation of the data. So these are bland, mere numbers. So what do they mean? What does it mean when sales have risen by 5% in the past month? What does that mean to me as a decision maker, as a manager? So how is that going to impact my operations for the coming period? So there's a lot of things that you need to consider when you are planning for writing your report. To begin with, let's look together at the formal definition of a report. So what is a report? It's a document. What does this document contain? It has information. How is this information presented? It's organized in a narrative, graphic, or tabular form. Okay, so there are many ways for you to prepare a report. It could be basically written in forms of paragraphs. It could be graphic, like the infographics that we see every day on social media. It could be in tabular form, so using tables. How is it prepared? It is prepared in ad hoc, so it's kind of a temporary thing. So it's you are given this task and you have to start preparing for it, and then you present it, and then you no longer use the report. It refers or may refer to a specified period, event, or occurrences, meaning when you present data about sales, for example, when you present data about the performance of a plant or a factory, this performance is shown for a particular period of time. So from June 21st to July 21st, this data is relevant to this particular period. And it also references particular events or occurrences. And it could be communicated or presented in oral or written form. So you could present it in hard copies or soft copies, or it can be presented in an oral form, sort of like basically a presentation where you talk about and deliver your findings, deliver the contents of the report orally through a presentation or in a meeting. Now that we have gone through the definition of what a report is, let's discuss a little the qualities and the criteria for a good business report. So it needs to be organized, meaning the reader or the person who is taking advantage of that report is able to locate information quickly. So what does that mean exactly? It means that the report is put together and composed in an effective way so that you are able to reach the information and the data that you require immediately without having to go through multiple pages. It also needs to be well supported, meaning you can trust the information provided by the report. So it's backed with hard evidence, it's backed with facts and data. Otherwise, the credibility of the report is compromised. And finally, a good business report is useful so that you can use it for actually making decisions. So it provides you with correct information, with proof and evidence that you can use so that you can actually make decisions and solve problems. When it comes to planning the report, we go back to basics. It's a communication tool, correct? So in any communication tool and medium that you use, you need to define your purpose and state your goals. So for your report, again, you need to define the report's purpose. Why are you writing this report? What is the reason? And how is this report going to be used? And then, of course, you have to analyze your audience. Who is going to read this report? To whom this report is intended? Meaning, who is the audience of the report? So you need to analyze this audience, and you go back to those questions in audience analysis. What does the audience already know? How is the audience likely to react, etc. And finally, you need to determine what data is needed to solve the problem or to make the decision. So the purpose of the report is for the readers to make decisions, to know something about a certain topic so that they would be better informed to make a decision or solve a problem. So, think about the problem itself and keep the decision to be made in mind. To solve the problem and to make the decision, what does the decision maker need in terms of information and data? So these are some of the steps that you need to follow when you're planning your report. You need to define and state your purpose, you need to analyze the audience, and you also need to determine what type of data is required so that the problem can be solved. So in your report, you will require data. So there are two major types of data. We have primary data and secondary data. So primary data is the data collected by you, by the researcher, to solve a specific problem. So in case you are writing a report, or in case you were given an assignment by your instructor to search for the best tools of communication in the business environment. So this is your research goal, and now you are searching for data about this particular topic. So any data that you find is considered primary data. The data that you collect about this particular topic is primary data. Secondary data, however, it is not data collected by the original researcher. It is data collected by someone else and for a different topic, for a different research topic, but it is still data that can be used for your purpose. Let's think of an example. So you were given an assignment by me to search, to write a research paper about the best tools of communication to be used in the Saudi business environment. So this is your research topic. Okay, so now you start coming up with surveys and try to collect some responses from companies around Jubail, and you are trying to analyze this data. So this is primary data collected by you, the researcher, about the topic of the research. You might find some other data collected by somebody else about a different topic. It could be about, not necessarily about research in the business environment or communication in the business environment. It could be about something else, like the best practices of writing reports in the country of Angola. But it is still something that can be used for your research. So that would be secondary data. So you need to differentiate and be able to distinguish primary from secondary data. So what are the different types of secondary data? We have basically published and unpublished secondary data. What we mean by published is that it's widely disseminated, meaning it is accessible by a lot of people. it is published. It is shared by the researchers or by the owners through a mass communication medium like the internet, for example. So what are some of the sources of secondary published data? You have, of course, the internet. If you do a Google search, whatever you find, that's part of published secondary data. You can find secondary data, or actually useful data, in journals, magazines, and newspaper articles as well. Any data that you find in books, brochures, and pamphlets, as well as technical reports, these are things that are made public. So it is, accessible most of the time for free by anyone. So that would be published secondary data. When we talk about unpublished secondary data, it means that the access to this data is restricted, is limited. Okay? So some of the sources and the examples include company records. So you cannot go to SABIC and ask them to view the records of their employees. You don't have the clearance. You're not an employee there. Not only you're not an employee, you're not part of HR, for example. Only HR employees can view those records. So you have to get special permission for that. So it's not public, it's not accessible by anyone. Things like legal documents as well. So court records, if you go to the general court here in Jubail and you ask them to view some of the records relevant to the previous cases, they're not going to let you see it because it is confidential. Personal files as well. So things like expense records. You don't come to me and tell me I need to view your bank statements. This is private information. Only with my permission you can view it. So it's not made public, it's not accessible. And finally, of course, medical records. You don't go to Al-Fanatir Hospital and ask them to view the records of their patients. This is confidential, only to be seen by medical staff. So these are the two different types of secondary data, where you have published, meaning this is widely disseminated, it's widely accessible and made public to everyone, and you have unpublished secondary data where the access is limited and restricted. So since one of the preferred sources for students and for anyone who is tasked with writing a report is the internet, we have to take a stop and consider evaluating these internet resources. What we mean is that not every single resource available online is a good and credible source. Just because it is found through Google, it doesn't mean that it's a good resource to be used for your report or for your research. So you have to evaluate this resource based on a number of factors and criteria. The first is authority. So who is the owner, who is the publisher, who is the creator of this website or of this study or of this book, brochure, etc. that you found online? Is it a reputable agency? Is it a credible source or not? This is why we always say that Wikipedia, for example, is not a credible source to be used for academic purposes, because Wikipedia is an open source kind of web page, meaning I can go now and just write whatever I want on Wikipedia. So there are problems when it comes to authority and credibility. Okay, the same thing applies when we talk about accuracy and reliability. You cannot always depend 100% on Wikipedia, on whatever you find in terms of data on that website, because anyone can change it. No one checks whether this information is correct and whether it's accurate. So you need to be careful when it comes to the resources that you select. And also purpose and objectivity. So why, or what were the goals for publishing this particular study or this particular book or creating that website that you are now viewing for your report or for your research? So is it objective or not? Sometimes people have their own agendas. So they write this article, for example, with the purpose of not finding the truth, but for proving their point, which makes them biased, and therefore this is not objective data. This is not an objective source that you can use. And also coverage. So does it actually, cover all of the aspects that you want to cover for your research topic or for your report? So is it relevant to your topic, and does it cover all the aspects? Maybe it is very narrow and focuses only on a particular subtopic of your bigger topic. So you need to be careful with that. And finally, currency, meaning is it up to date? Is it current? You don't want to, quote a source that is 15 years old. You don't want to say, based on the report created by someone in 1980 something, and this is a recent topic. You don't want to talk about information technology, for example, and reference studies that are 15 years old. So you need to be careful when it comes to evaluating your internet resources. Not every source is a good one. So be careful when it comes to selecting your resources. And just like internet resources, you also need to evaluate research studies. Not every research study is one that you can use. Okay, you need to be careful again when it comes to selection, when it comes to including and referencing this study for the purpose of writing or composing your report. So again, based on a number of different criteria, you need to assess whether this is appropriate and suitable for your report. So you need to ask yourself some questions like, what was the purpose of the study? So you can determine, is the purpose of the study that you are now using as a source of data, is it suitable and appropriate for your own report? Because again, it could be biased, it could be not objective. So therefore, it is going to present you with data and statistics that are not useful. Then, how was the data collected? What were the means and the methods of data collection, so that you understand exactly whether or not this study is actually suitable for you? Maybe they only depended on phone calls. They, tasked a number of people to call respondents and ask them for some feedback. Is this something that you can depend on and rely on for your report? This is for you to evaluate. And also, how was the data analyzed? What were the statistical methodology used to analyze the data? Was it an ANOVA table? Was it linear regression analysis or something else? So you need to be careful when it comes to knowing how was the data analyzed, okay? So that you would be able to determine if this is actually data that is useful for you. And then how consistent is the data with that from other studies? Is it very far away from the findings of other studies? Meaning, if it is known, like many studies have been made about a particular topic, and they have all come up with similar findings, then there's one study that is very different, extremely different from all the other studies. So is it something that you can use? Maybe not, because if it is that different, it means maybe there was something wrong with the interpretation of the data or with the collection of the data, etc. And finally, how old is the data? Again, is it up to date? Is it collected 15 years ago? So maybe this is not applicable anymore. That's the problem when data is when the data is out of date. What that means is that it's not current anymore. So the situation in 1950 is not similar to the situation in 2020, correct? So what could have been used in 1950 is no longer effective in 2020. So this is why we ask about currency. And now we will be moving on to the second part of planning our report, and that is data collection. So what are the different methods, the different varieties available for us as report writers to collect data for our report? And one big tool and common tool to be used is, of course, questionnaires or surveys. Okay, so we need to be able to think critically about questionnaires. So we need, first of all, to evaluate when is it useful, when should we use questionnaires? This is not a tool to be used in all types of different cases and scenarios. So when the information can be provided easily and quickly, then it would be a good idea to use a questionnaire. So because a questionnaire takes a long time to prepare and a long time to distribute and then a long time to collect back. So when the information can be provided in a quick and easy manner, then it would be a good idea to use questionnaires. And also when the target audience is homogeneous. Homogeneous means that, they are all of the same kind, they are all similar, they are all alike. So when all the people that you want to ask about your research topic are, for example, students of JUC. So in this case, the target audience is homogeneous. They are all male, they are all students of JUC, they are all graduates of high school, so there are a lot of similarities, a lot of common factors between the audience members. So it would be a good idea to use questionnaires. And also when sufficient enough time is available. As we mentioned, it takes a long time to prepare those questionnaires, to send them and to collect them, to get them back from the respondents or the participants. So you can use questionnaires to collect data in a number of situations. Now that we have determined, for example, that the situation is appropriate for us to be using a questionnaire to collect information. So how do we build, how do we construct, how do we put together this questionnaire? We need, to consider three different aspects. The first is the content of the questionnaire. So the types of questions within the questionnaire itself, for example, the wording and the phrasing of those questions. And then the organization. So which part should come first? Do I present the demographics part first? Do I ask about the research topic? Do I, how do I present and how do I lay out my questionnaire for the participants? And finally, the format of the questionnaire. Is it going to be hard copies on printed paper? Is it going to be electronic? Is it going to be both? So how am I going to even send it and share it? Am I going to send it in an email? Am I going to post it on social media? So all of those are aspects to consider when you are constructing your questionnaire. And now when it comes to the content of the questionnaire, so what aspects do you need to include in the questionnaire? So what you need to include in a questionnaire are things that are not available elsewhere. Meaning there are a lot of sources of information. If you go to the some government agencies' websites, the Ministry of Human Resources, the Ministry of Housing, for example, there are a lot of reports available and published by them. So in case you are unable to find some of the information that you require for your topic, then you would use a questionnaire, and then you ask for the information that are unavailable elsewhere. That the only way you can get this information is through answers in a questionnaire. And then when you have a purpose for, you need to have a purpose for each question. You don't want to just, okay, I need 50 questions, and then you come up with questions arbitrarily. No, only include questions that will serve your research or your topic for the report that you are writing. Okay, so each question has a purpose, has a goal that that you would use for composing your report. Then you need to use precise wording. You need to select words and terminology and sentences that are clear, specific, and precise. You don't want your participants to be confused. And then use neutrally worded questions. So you don't want to suggest to someone that this is the answer that they should be making. An example of that could be, you don't want to say, do you support this rule which is going to be a massive success for the economy of our country and is going to bring in a lot of job opportunities? This is a biased question, because you are pushing the respondent the participant to say something that may go against their opinions. So instead of saying it like that, you should just say, do you support this rule, yes or no? You don't want to suggest the answer. And also you need to ensure that the response choices are exhaustive and mutually exclusive. What that means is that, all the answers that you are providing, all the choices that you are providing for the respondents of the questionnaire are, not repeated. So I don't want to be confused. Well, both situations apply to me. I don't want that case. I don't want my readers, my participants to be confused. So they need to be mutually exclusive. And finally, you need to be careful about sensitive questions. When you ask people about money, about their income, when you ask people about, their religions and, life choices, things like that are a little bit sensitive. So you need to be careful how you word them, and, you state that you really determine the purpose of such questions. And a good idea would be to pilot test your questionnaire, meaning do a dry run. Like basically, before you start distributing your questionnaire to 100 different people, just try it out first with a couple of people, with only 5 people, and see if there are any particular common problems. Then you can fix the questionnaire before you disseminate it widely. In this part, we will, view together a number of, different types of questions that you can include in your questionnaire. What I need you to keep in mind is that each and every question has its own advantages and also disadvantages. So it depends on the purpose of your survey, the purpose of your report. It depends on, whether or not you would require this to be transferred and transformed into digital format. So if it is in hard copies, so when you transfer it into an electronic format, is this going to be easy for you or not? So again, it depends on the purpose. So the first type of question that we have here is open questions. So from the name itself, open questions mean that these are open-ended responses. So you just ask the question, and the respondent can just write whatever they want. They don't have predetermined choices from which they can select. No, they can write anything that they want. Again, this is good because as a respondent, I can share my opinion. But this is also not good because it's going to take me a lot of time to read it and to put it in a digital format. So again, advantages and disadvantages. The second type is what is called list questions. So in here, there's a predetermined list of choices and selections that you just need to tick one. You just need to select one of the options already provided for you. This is good because for me as a person who is going to analyze this data, this is very easily done for me. It's not going to take me a lot of time, but this might propose a problem for some of the respondents, because what if none of the choices is applicable to them? A good exit, let's say, out of that is that you can offer, or you can provide the other choice, where you can simply ask your respondents, if none of the choices is applicable to your situation, then just write down what's applicable. And the third type of questions that we are viewing is the category questions. The category questions. So in here, you will have the same list of options, for a number of different questions. So when you ask people about, for example, age groups, so instead of asking them how old are you, you will tell them, please indicate your age. Is it between 20 and 25, or is it between 26 and 30? So these are categories, okay? And then when you also things like the one that you see now, So how often do you go to the doctor, for example? Is it once every week, or is it twice a month, or is it one per year? So it's a category, okay? It's not an actual, selection of one particular item. It's a category, and you can find the same options, once per week, 2 times a month. You can find the same thing, used for a lot of questions. And now with ranking questions, in here you basically have to rank. You basically have to, put the most important reasons maybe at the top, and then you go down based on level of importance. So you will be asked to basically put these choices in the order you feel is appropriate. So how important are these things to you? Let's say a question about, what do you like in a job? Is it the salary? Is it the training opportunities, or is it the possibility of promotion? So we are asking you to rank them and put them in order. For me, for example, let's say number one, the most important reason, I would select when it comes to choosing a job is salary. Then number two is the training opportunities, and number three is the promotion possibilities. So this is what we mean by ranking questions. Again, always think of advantages and disadvantages. And now with rating questions. So this is where you have to rate how strong something is. For example, how strongly do you agree with this statement? So is it agree, strongly disagree, or neutral, etc.? You have probably seen some questions like that in a lot of the surveys that you have seen. I know that you do a questionnaire at the end of each and every semester where you evaluate your courses. So you have probably gone through these questions as a respondent. But what about when you become a researcher yourself, when you have to put together a questionnaire and you will be the one collecting responses? Again, always think critically. So a rating question is basically when you have to not rank, not put together something in a particular order, but this is when you have to basically evaluate or rate how strong something is. Let's say, how strongly do you agree with the statement, for example? And now with quantity questions. So in here you basically have to enter or write down a number. So questions like this, what is your what is your year of birth? So you basically have to put down a number. Okay, so what is your age, for example? When did you graduate? 2012, for example. So a quantity question is where you have to insert or enter or write down a quantity, a number. And now when it comes to designing individual questions, so basically you have questions that are disseminated and shared to all the respondents, and then sometimes you would have to customize the survey based on a particular group of audience. So in some cases you have to adopt or adapt existing questions. What that means is that you sometimes, when I send a survey to the students of JUC, and then I need to also send the same questions to the students of KFUPM, sometimes I need to change, because I know, for example, that when we reference semesters, we use 401, 402, 403, right? This is the code that we use for our semesters. Maybe in KFUPM, they use a different type of code. So if I only put as my options from which they would select, if I only put 401, 402, 403, then this means that they will be unable to answer that particular question. So sometimes I might need to customize or adapt my questionnaire. And then the wording of the question. When I send my survey to the students of JUC, sometimes I would say, I would use things like academic department, academic program. So when I'm talking about these type of things in my questions, in KFUPM maybe they use different terms. So again, sometimes maybe I have to change the wording of the questions. And also translating questions into other languages. If I'm sending you this questionnaire in Arabic, and then I have to also send the same questionnaire to another university somewhere in India, let's say. So maybe I have to translate my questionnaire into their native language or to English. So sometimes, translation can be a hassle. As we have seen in our previous chapters, it's not just translating, literally. It's not about, translating words. The translation has to make sense. And finally, also question coding. So how would you present this question? You know that for each, and you have probably seen that in other surveys that you have responded to, where each question is given a code, is given a number, which will be used later by the programmers or by the people who are going to transform it into digital format. So sometimes the coding needs to be adapted as well. Let's look at practical examples. So here we have a number of questions, and we need to find out what is wrong with these questions. So if you need, even pause the video and try to think, what is wrong with the first question? What is your age? Then we have a blank space. So one of the issues that I have with this question is that it doesn't provide me with, with how the answer is needed. Meaning, do I write it in terms of numbers, and do I write, or do I, provide it in terms of writing? Do I say 32 in terms of just two numbers, 32, or do I write 30-2? So again, whenever you have questions like that, make sure that you provide your respondents with, the right format in which you require them to answer. And then the second question, what is wrong with this question? So what is the following, which of the following is most important to you when you select housing? So it means that this is a ranking question, right? So we need to order these elements in terms of what is most important to us. Again, sometimes this is going to be a little confusing to respondents, because maybe a couple of people are going to, rank it in terms of numbers. They say 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of them are going to say strongly agree, strongly disagree. Some of them are going to use arrows. Some of them are going to use tick marks. So you need to provide your respondents with the correct format to be used for answering and for responding to each type of question. And lastly, the last question here on this slide, what is wrong with this? So do you think that companies should block employee access to inappropriate websites that cause wasted time at work? This is not a neutrally worded question. Remember, we said that we need to use a neutral tone. This is pushing, or suggesting to the respondents that they should go with the answer yes, because no one is going to say, oh no, I support wasting time at work, right? So you should just stop here. Do you think that companies should block employee access to inappropriate websites? That's it. The rest of the question is sort of suggestive. It is pushing and motivating the respondents to answer in a certain way. The same kind of concepts also apply to these questions. So read questions 4, 5, and 6. Pause the video if you need, and try to come up with reasons why these questions presented like this are problematic. Okay. And now moving on to the organization of the questionnaire. So now we have talked about the content. We have seen question types. Let us talk a little about the organization. How do we, organize the contents of our questionnaire? So we need to arrange the questions in some logical order. You don't want your questions to be confusing in terms of how they are presented. So you don't want to say age, and then you don't want to say suddenly I see a question about money, and then I see another question about academics, and then I see a question about participation in community services. There needs to be a logical order for organizing these questions. Okay, for example, you have probably participated in responding to certain questionnaires and surveys. You would see that typically at the first part of the questionnaire, there are questions about what is called demographics. So, are you male or female? What is your age group? Where do you live? Things like that. And then you begin answering the questions that are relevant to the topic of the research or the topic of the report itself. So there needs to be some order, some logical flow. And then arrange the alternatives for each question in some logical order as well. So it's not only the ordering of the questions, it's also the ordering of the answers, the choices, the alternatives. So you don't want to, for questions like, rating questions where you have, agree, strongly agree, disagree, etc. You want it to be presented in a logical order as well. I don't want to see, for example, agree, then strongly disagree, then neutral. It needs to be presented in a way that makes sense so that you lessen the confusion. And then finally, give the questionnaire a descriptive title. So that we, as a respondent, I know what is this questionnaire about. So, for example, this questionnaire about study habits for university students. Something descriptive that tells the readers, that tells the respondents, what is the purpose of this questionnaire and what is the topic. And now with the format. So we have talked about the content and discussed the organization. It needs to be logical, it needs to make sense. So the format, it needs to be, presented in a way that is professional. Remember, this is a business report. So for business purposes, this is something that managers are going to see or customers are going to access. So it needs to be formatted in a good way. In terms of even things like color, font types, the ordering of the pages, and all of those things are important. Yes, the content is extremely relevant in this case, but also the formatting is important, because sometimes the content can be very good, but it's presented in a way that is done haphazardly, so it's not coming out as a professional outcome, as a professional product. So pay attention to the format, and there are a lot of tools that you can use online, like Google surveys, for example, where you can basically just enter the data that you need, and Google is going to help you when it comes to formatting and disseminating it. So there are a lot of things that you can use to format your questionnaire. And now with the third aspect of planning our report, and that's displaying and showing quantitative information. So how do you showcase your statistics, your numbers, your figures, your quantitative data? So now, one of the commonly used options for presenting quantitative data, for presenting figures and numbers, is using tables. So why tables are useful? When should you use tables? How can tables help you? They show numerical data in a more efficient and interesting way than with narrative text. So instead of just writing paragraphs, you can present your data in a short, brief table, and it's going to be even more visually comfortable for the readers of the report. It's easier for me to look at a table with 4 cells than to read 4 paragraphs, right? And then tables are useful because they can provide more information than a chart. A chart is basically just numbers with maybe some labels, but a table combines some of the the benefits of text and also charts, because you can include numbers in a table, and you can also include text in a table. And tables are good to use because because they allow easy comparison of figures. When you organize your table in a good way, you can, each and every column can, indicate the difference between category A, category B, between company A, company B, between student A and student B, so that you can easily compare the, the data and the figures between one respondent and another. Now, why you shouldn't use table? In certain cases, tables are not the way to go, because tables cannot be presented on a screen when it comes to dense data. So if you were to deliver a presentation, for example, okay, and this is why we always say that in presentations your PowerPoint slides should only include things like bullet points, because when you have big, long, extensive paragraphs, or dense tables, like tables with a lot of text and information, when it comes to presenting it on a PowerPoint slide and showing it on a screen, it's not going to be easy to read. So tables are not good for that. Tables, cannot show trends as obviously as a chart. So what do we mean by a trend? You have probably seen those figures like bar charts, for example, where you can find and easily detect if there is a pattern, if there is a trend. So from like the use of internet, for example, in Saudi Arabia from 1999 until now, 2020, you would see that the bar is always rising every year, indicating that there is a pattern, there is a trend. It's going up all the time. So a chart can easily show you that, but a table cannot. And finally, tables cannot capture attention as well as a chart. When you present your data in a chart with, a chart that is well developed, a chart that is well formatted with clear labels and, clear numbers and figures, and you use the correct type of chart for the appropriate type of chart for your data, of course it's going to capture the attention better than a table. Sometimes, a table is basically plain, but charts have, colors and it could be more interesting for the readers. Now, this is a good example of how you would format a table. So if you look at the different, components of this table, different the different aspects of this table. So you have a table title, a table subtitle. You have things like column headings, which are provided in bold font, so that it indicates to the readers that this is the heading, this is the category or the type of the information, the type of data that is being presented. Sometimes you could offer also optional things like footnotes and sources and such. If you look at things like cross tabulation, so this is when you have, within one column you have sub-columns, let's say. So again, you have to format the table in a way that makes sense, in a way that is easily readable, so that the person and the audience who is going to be presented with this table is able to locate the information that they need, and they would be able to understand exactly what is being presented, and therefore use it for the purpose of making a decision or solving a problem. And here we have a chart. As you can see, there are a lot of differences between tables and charts. Let's evaluate this chart. So in here, this is a bar chart where it's presented with it's offering us some information about a particular topic. So we have cost of living index, and then we have the other options like food, housing, utilities, etc. So think about what you can do to improve this chart. One of the things I can suggest, and again you can pause the video and try to think what can be done to improve it. One of the things you can use is that look at the colors So you have a yellow background, and then you also have yellow bars. Sometimes this is a little confusing. The numbers also above each and every bar are not in bold font, so it could be a better idea to put it in a bold font. And also, if you look at the color of the other bar, so it's kind of like presented in water bubbles. Is it really professional to use that kind of color, to use that kind of background? So always think about, formatting. Always think about the reader. Put yourself in the place of the audience. Is this professional enough for you? Is this something that you would be comfortable showing to a CEO or to a senior manager? So you need to be careful. So when it comes to chart types, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have actually used charts in, let's say, Microsoft Excel in your prep year. So there are a lot of chart types, and each and every one serves a particular purpose and is more appropriate for a certain types of data, for a certain type of data. So we have line charts. Line charts. What they show us is the trend over time. It shows that the line chart would be a good idea, would be a good tool to use to show patterns, to show trends, if something is increasing or decreasing. When it comes to bar charts, these are good for comparing items. So how much money is JUC using, and how much money is JIC using? So it shows us comparison so that we can compare the money, the budget that is being used by the different colleges in the Royal Commission. And then we have pie charts, which show parts of a whole. So how much of the budget, so let's put it this way. We have 100 million Saudi riyals as the budget for the education sector in the Royal Commission, in RC. So out of that 100 million Saudi riyal, how much is JIC using, how much is JUC using, and how much is JTI using, the Jubail Technical Institute? So this would be a good tool to use if you want to show parts of a whole, like market share, for example, budget allowances, and so on. So you don't use charts just for the heck of it. You use charts based on what you want to show, based on the type of data that you want to present. Now with the final part in our chapter, and that is interpreting the data, so explaining the data. So I have now those graphs and charts and tables that I'm putting in my report. Now, what does that mean? How do I use this data? How do I present it? How do I explain it to the decision makers? That's what data interpretation is all about. So to interpret, to explain data, to use it for decision making, we have to go through a number of steps. So first of all, determine the meaning of each finding by itself, in conjunction with other finding and in conjunction with all other findings. So that's put in a condensed way. So it's isolation, context, and synthesis. What that means is, so the first part of the sentence, determine the meaning of each finding by itself, that's isolation. So now I have found out through my questionnaire in my report, I have found out that students of JIC or students of JUC spend 3 hours every day studying. So that's isolation. I need to determine what that means on its own without comparing it with any other thing. And then I compare it with other findings. So I compare the hours of study of JUC students with the hours of study of JIC students and with the hours of study of JTI students. So now, what is the meaning of that? Does that mean that JUC students spend more time studying? So what does that mean? Does that mean that they are better students? Does that mean that maybe their courses are more difficult? So this is why you compare. And then also, so that's context. That's the second type of the sentence, in conjunction with other findings. And then finally, the last part of the sentence, and in conjunction with all other findings, so that's synthesis. So basically, this is when you put it together in a pool of a variety of studies. So now I have compared the hours of study of JUC students with the hours of study of other colleges within RC. So let's compare it now with the hours of study, the average hours of study for all students in the world. So that's synthesis. So this now gives me a better idea of what's going on. So you start with isolation. What does it mean? On its own, by itself. Then you put it in a context. Okay, so you compare it with other findings. And then you synthesize by comparing your findings with all other findings. All other findings about the topic of the research. So how many hours a day does an average university student spend studying? So that's the whole, the average for the whole world. So and now compare it with JUC students, and now I can come up with a better understanding of how I can use this information now to make a decision. And now, so to present this finding, I need to discuss it. I need to explain it. I need to describe it. So you cannot describe it and present it without those steps that we just explained: isolation, context, and synthesis. And what you need to also present, are a lot of other things. So trends. So is it increasing or is it decreasing? And what does that mean? If every year the hours of study of JUC students is increasing, then this is a signal for something. Are the courses becoming more difficult, or are the students becoming more, let's say, interested in studying, etc.? You also need to discuss unexpected findings. So if you found something in your research or in your report, something that was unusual, you didn't expect that JUC students actually spend a lot of time, studying every day when it comes to comparing them with students of JIC and JTI. So that was unexpected for me. This is something that you need to present. This is something that you need to discuss, because this is important for decision makers. And then you need to also discuss the data that reinforces or contradicts other data. So again, you need, because we are being objective here. Remember, the whole one of the guiding principles for doing research and for presenting reports in the business environment is being ethical and objective. So even if you found something that doesn't really support your idea, you need to present it clearly. So you need to discuss and offer insight about the data that either supports, that reinforces your finding, or even contradict your data, contradict your findings, or basically go against it, so that you are being totally and completely objective. You also need to discuss extreme values. So there are things in statistics called outliers. So for example, when we distributed a survey to JUC students, we have found that 90% of the students spend, let's say, 2 hours every day studying. But there was 2 students who responded to the survey who said that they studied 6 hours every day. So that's an extreme value. And there was another student who said, I study 0 hours every day. I never study. So those are called extreme values or outliers. So you also need to pay attention to those and present them. And finally, data that raises questions. So in case there is something that, if there's a particular finding, there were, particular pieces of data that maybe did not make sense, that maybe was not, up to your expectations, data that, provokes further research and investigation, this is also something that you need to present. And when you do that, you would maintain objectivity and you would maintain ethical practices, and therefore you would be a good researcher and a good report writer. And finally, since we mentioned that it's all about ethics, it's all about maintaining objectivity and ensuring that you are not allowing your own bias and your own opinions, your own judgments to interfere with the presentation of the report. When you are investigating a certain topic, you should be completely objective and present the findings, even if the findings are not in line with your own beliefs or with your own expectations. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you on the next chapter.